technically an agnostic, although he was an atheist in practice. Sir Alfred Eyre, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, and Martin Heidegger, all of whom were 20th century atheists, well before Flew began writing. In Russell's case, it is quite obvious that he did not produce anything beyond a few polemical pamphlets on his sceptical views and his disdain for organized religion. His Religion and Science and Why I Am Not a Christian were simply anthologies of articles. He produced no systematic philosophy of religion. At best, he drew attention to the problem of evil and sought to refute traditional arguments for God's existence without generating any new arguments of his own. Eyre, Sartre, Camus, and Heidegger have this in common. Their focus was on generating a specific way of engaging in philosophical discussion, an after-effect of which was the denial of God. They had their own systems of thought of which atheism was a byproduct. You had to buy into their systems to buy into their atheism. The same might be said of later nihilists like Richard Rorty and Jacques Derrida. Of course, there were major philosophers of Flew's generation who were atheists. W.V.O. Quine and Gilbert Ryle are obvious instances. But none took the step of developing book-length arguments to support their personal beliefs. Why so? In many instances, professional philosophers in those days were disinclined to dirty their delicate hands by indulging in such popular, even vulgar discussions. In other cases, the motive was prudence. Certainly, in later years, there were atheist philosophers who critically examined and rejected the traditional arguments for God's existence. These ranged from Paul Edwards, Wallace Matson, Kai Nielsen, and Paul Kurtz to J.L. Mackie, Richard Gale, and Michael Martin. But their works did not change the agenda and framework of discussion the way Flew's innovative publications did. Where does the originality of Flew's atheism lie? In Theology and Falsification, God and Philosophy, and the Presumption of Atheism, he developed novel arguments against theism that, in some respects, laid out a roadmap for subsequent philosophy of religion. In Theology and Falsification, he raised the question of how religious statements can make meaningful claims. His much-quoted expression, "Death by 1,000 qualifications," captures this point memorably. In God and Philosophy, he argued that no discussion on God's existence can begin until the coherence of the concept of an omnipresent, omniscient spirit had been established. In the Presumption of Atheism, he contended that the burden of proof rests with theism and that atheism should be the default position. Along the way, he of course analyzed the traditional arguments for God's existence. But it was his reinvention of the frames of reference that changed the whole nature of the discussion. In the context of all of that, Flew's recent rejection of atheism was clearly a historic event. But it is little known that even in his atheist days, Flew had, in a sense, opened the door to a new and revitalized theism. Flew, Logical Positivism, and the Rebirth of Rational Theism. Here's the paradox. By defending the legitimacy of discussing theological claims and challenging philosophers of religion to elucidate their assertions, Flew facilitated the rebirth of rational theism in analytic philosophy after the dark days of logical positivism. A little background information will be of value here. Logical positivism, as some might remember, was the philosophy introduced by a European group called the Vienna Circle in the early 1920s, and popularized by A.J. Eyre in the English-speaking world with his 1936 work, Language, Truth and Logic. According to the logical positivists, the only meaningful statements were those capable of being verified through sense experience, or true, simply by virtue of their form and the meaning of the words used. Thus, a statement was meaningful if its truth or falsehood could be verified by empirical observation, e.g., scientific study. The statements of logic and pure mathematics were tautologies, that is, they were true.